My name's Ariel, and I live in Georgia, not too far from the Alabama border. Several summers ago, I drove out to a small town in Alabama for a 4th of July cookout my college friend Isabel was throwing. It was one of those backyard get-togethers with paper plates, bootleg fireworks, and way too much food. Honestly, it was one of the better nights I'd had in a long time. Good people, good vibes, kids running around with sparklers. That kind of thing. I didn't head home until a little after 10 p.m., which, looking back, was probably my first mistake. That part of the state gets real quiet once the sun goes down. The drive back was just over 2 hours, most of it down back roads, long, empty stretches of dark, 2-lane highway with thick woods lining both sides. Every now and then I'd pass an old farmhouse or a tiny church with a gravel lot, but mostly it was just darkness. And more darkness. I had the music playing low and was still in a good mood from the party, but I'll be honest, there's something about driving through places like that at night that always gets under my skin. Even if nothing's happening, the atmosphere alone makes you uneasy. I've always been a little afraid of the dark, so maybe that plays into it. About 30 minutes into the drive, I noticed a pair of headlights in my rearview mirror. At first, I didn't think much of it. Probably just someone else taking the same back road. But after a while, I started paying attention. It was a gray Nissan Altima, totally normal. Except the bottom half of the car looked like it had been driving through mud. I could see it clearly every time we passed under one of those rare overhead lights at a small crossing. Still not that weird, until I realized that no matter how much I sped up or slowed down, that car stayed exactly the same distance behind me. I tried to shake it off, thinking it might be a coincidence, so I picked up speed, about 5 or 10 miles per hour faster than before. The Altima did the same. Then I slowed way down, drifting below the speed limit. Still there, 6 or 7 car lengths behind me. Never getting closer, never falling back. On roads like that, people pass each other all the time. I even drifted slightly right a few times to make it obvious they could go around. They didn't. That's when I decided to test them. There was a random left turn coming up. Looked like a tiny residential road with maybe 4 houses spread out along it. I took the turn without hesitation, hoping to lose them. But about 10 seconds later, the Altima turned in too. That's when my stomach dropped. There was no way they just happened to be going that way. I was being followed, no doubt in my mind. My heart started pounding, like someone had a gun to my head. That's honestly the only comparison I can make. I felt helpless out there in the middle of nowhere. No clue who was in that car or what they wanted. But every possibility I could imagine was terrifying. Then I heard it. That awful chime from the dash. My gas tank was nearly empty. I've got an old 2012 Corolla, and the gas light on that thing is unpredictable. Sometimes it means 20 miles left. Other times, I'm lucky to get 10. And out there, gas stations aren't exactly common. I pulled out my phone and searched for the nearest 24-hour spot. The closest one was over 8 miles away. I didn't know if I'd make it, but I had to try. I was not about to stop on the side of the road with that car still tailing me. I thought about calling the police, but out there in the middle of nowhere, I figured it'd take forever for them to show up. And honestly, part of me didn't want to say it out loud, like, calling the cops would make the danger more real. I know that sounds irrational, and I'm kind of embarrassed to admit it, but that's the truth. I was panicking. A couple of minutes later,
the gas needle dropped to empty, not just low. Empty. I was gripping the wheel tight, trying to keep my mind from spiraling. Every little sound the car made felt louder. The road felt endless. I felt stupid and powerless and scared beyond belief, but somehow I made it. I saw the glow of the gas station sign in the distance and I swear I almost cried. I took the turn hard into the lot and parked quickly, jumped out of the car, and ran inside. I didn't even bother shutting the door all the Washington. It didn't come in, it just sat there for about 10 seconds with the engine still running. No one got out. It felt like whoever was inside was debating whether to follow me any further. Then, all at once, the car peeled off fast and disappeared back down the road we'd come from. I told the guy where. A few weeks later, I was home watching the news when a segment came on. Just background noise until they started talking about two men suspected of armed robbery, attempted murder, and a bunch of other charges across rural Alabama. The image they showed was a blurry security cam still, and the car th.
This all happened just 2024. My friend Jimmy is quite active and well connected in the music community. By music community, I specifically mean the dance electronic music scene, mostly along the East Coast, especially in New Jersey and New York. It's genuinely impressive what Jimmy and his team have managed to achieve in just 2 years. In short, their company organizes events at high-end venues, usually the most popular nightclubs or party spots in whatever city they're in. Then they outsource talent for the performances, and often the DJs are either very famous or at least borderline famous. I'm not too involved in that scene myself, so I don't know exactly who they've brought in, but I do know that some really big names have been part of it. Anyway, that's enough background. Jimmy and I go way back. We've known each other for over 20 years. I've basically known him my whole life, and he's been my best friend for most of it. Because of that, he always lets me and the rest of our old friends attend his shows for free, and we get to hang out with the artists in the VIP section. It's honestly really cool, and I wish I expressed my gratitude more often. Jimmy had planned a big event for the 4th of July weekend at the Jersey Shore. It was set to be his biggest show yet, and all of our mutual friends were going. He invited me to come down early with him, and of course, I agreed. The two of us, along with another friend, Ryan, drove down, about an hour and a half, and arrived at the venue about 4 hours before doors opened. Since Jimmy and his team were busy setting up, Ryan and I started drinking early to pass the time. The venue allowed Jimmy and his team unlimited access to free alcohol, and Ryan and I definitely took full advantage of that. By the time the first DJ started his set, we were already pretty buzzed. Actually, more than that. It was the 4th of July after all, so we figured a little partying was justified. A few hours later, we were both completely wasted. Honestly, I don't think I've been that drunk since. Not even close. Don't get me wrong, we're grown men and we can handle our liquor. Throwing up or acting like idiots wasn't the issue. It was more about having poor impulse control and impaired decision-making. Still, we were having a great time. At least from what I can remember. The event was winding down, and it was getting to that time of night when you either figured out how you were getting home or who you were going home with, or both. Jimmy had booked an Airbnb nearby and promised both Ryan and me a bed. So getting home wasn't an issue. The other problem, however, all of this was running through my mind. The two of us danced our way over to the bar and started chatting with a couple of girls we found attractive. It didn't take long before we figured out who we'd be spending the rest of the night with. Neither Ryan nor I are Calvin Klein models, but we're both over 6 feet tall. For some reason, most of the guys who hang around the Jersey Shore tend to be shorter than average, so being tall gives you an even bigger edge out there. And strangely enough, height seems to be the number one thing girls on the shore care about. Not looks, not physique, not brains, just height. Oh, don't ask me why. The Jersey Shore and the female mind are both mysteries I've yet to figure out. I'm probably butchering their names, but I'm pretty sure the girls introduce themselves as Gianna and Marcella. That's about the point where my memory starts getting a little fuzzy, so the rest of the story might be missing some pieces. As far as I can recall, it was actually Marcella who suggested we all head somewhere else to keep the party going, which Ryan and I were more than happy to agree to. Gianna handed each of us a drink and insisted we get on their level before leaving, even though we had already consumed enough alcohol to match her body weight in liquid form. I know, the idea of girls buying drinks for guys sounds a little backward, and yeah, it is. But these girls clearly had money. You could tell by the way they were dressed. After finishing the drinks, the four of us made our way toward the exit. The moment we stepped outside, Marcella suggested we go back to her place, which was close by and right on the beach. That actually caught me off guard. I was expecting we'd head back to our Airbnb since guys usually end up hosting in these situations. But both girls insisted that Marcella's beach house was way nicer than whatever inland Airbnb we had lined up for the night. They had a point, so neither Ryan nor I argued. We walked along the beach, talking the whole way. The girls actually seemed really smart and well-spoken, which was refreshing. For once, it felt good to talk about something other than nightlife or whatever shallow nonsense I'm used to discussing with drunk people. Not just girls, but people in general. At one point, I actually started feeling kind of embarrassed about how drunk I was. I felt like I couldn't express myself clearly, like I was coming off as some kind of idiot. That's when I realized I was feeling way more intoxicated than I had just 15 minutes earlier. But it wasn't the usual kind of drunk. It felt like my body was melting under its own weight, like I could collapse at any second. My legs felt flimsy, almost like they were made of cardboard, if that makes any sense. My limbs, mouth, and even my eyes were getting harder and harder to control, and at one point, my hands and feet started to feel a little numb. But just as suddenly as that sensation came, it passed, and I was back to feeling just plain drunk, at least for the time being. That's when we pulled up to the beach house. It was insane. I'm probably exaggerating because I was so drunk, but it looked like what I imagine a pro athlete's beach house would look like. We went inside, took off our shoes, and found ourselves in what I think was the living room. I say think because the place was so ridiculously luxurious that I had no frame of reference for it. It was decorated, but also somehow minimalistic, even though those two words usually contradict each other. There were actual sculptures on pedestals in there, but it didn't feel cluttered or over the top. Everything on display blended so seamlessly into the space, like it was part of the architecture itself. I really wish I had the presence of mind to take a picture, but my head was all over the place. Apparently, so was Ryan's, because within 15 minutes of arriving, he and Marcella had disappeared somewhere inside that maze of a house, leaving me alone with Gianna. She leaned in to kiss me, and that's the last thing I remember. Not the kiss itself, just her leaning in. That's where everything cuts off. I don't remember getting woozy again, or drinking more, or doing anything else. There's just this massive blank in my memory that spans several hours, and no matter what I do, I can't get any of it back. The thing is, I know I didn't pass out. There are texts on my phone that I sent during that time, so I was definitely still conscious. There's digital proof I was awake and functioning. But I don't remember a single bit of it, and before you say it was just a typical alcohol-induced blackout, that's not what this was. I rarely black out, and even the few times I have, I can usually remember flashes of the night, random scenes, little moments, enough to piece together a rough timeline. Plus, during those times, I was way drunker than I was that night. That's another reason I don't think a regular blackout explains what happened. And here's the weirdest part. Ryan went through the exact same thing, at basically the exact same time. That's way too specific to just be coincidence. Here's the next thing I remember. Waking up with the sun directly overhead in a random patch of bushes, over an hour away from where the party was. I didn't know that yet because my phone wasn't in my pocket. Actually, nothing was in my pocket. My wallet and keys were gone, but it gets even weirder. They weren't even my pockets. I was wearing someone else's clothes, and not Ryan's either, a complete stranger's. The only thing I still had that actually belonged to me was my shoes. Even those were messed up. Both shoes had the laces removed and were soaking wet. My head was pounding, and everything felt disoriented, like I was waking up from anesthesia. I didn't even sit up right away. I just stared up at the sky for a minute, trying to figure out where I was. Bushes, someone else's clothes, no wallet, no phone, no keys. Based on how my shoes looked, it seemed like I had been in water recently, but I didn't smell like salt water or chlorine. The worst part of all of it was the blankness. I genuinely couldn't remember anything after Gianna left. Like I said, that's when the panic really started to kick in. I wasn't just hungover, I was scared. I had no idea how I got there. What if I got into a fight? What if I crashed a car? What if someone drugged me? I didn't have a single point of reference for the last 10 hours. I stood up and realized there wasn't a single recognizable landmark around me. It didn't look like a beach town, which freaked me out even more. The road just curved ahead into more trees. But right across the street, maybe a few hundred feet away, there was a 7-Eleven. It was literally the only thing in sight, so I headed straight for it. I asked the guy behind the counter if I could use his phone, telling him mine had been stolen. He stared at me for a second, probably trying to decide if I was trying to scam him. But then he slid the phone across the counter. The first number that came to mind was my sister's. It was the only number I still had memorized besides my parents', and there was no way in hell I was calling them. My sister picked up right away, and I tried to explain everything as best as I could. She ended up giving me Ryan's number. I called him several times, but he didn't answer. That's when I started wondering if maybe what happened to me had happened to him too. Drugged, robbed, dumped in some random bushes far from home. I was just about to call the police when, guess what? Ryan walks into the same 7-Eleven. We just stared at each other for a second before dapping each other up. Then he told me his side of the story, and yep, it was pretty much the exact same thing. That confirmed it for both of us. We called the cops and made sure to seriously thank the 7-Eleven clerk. Fast forward a few minutes, and we're outside the store explaining everything to the police. To their credit, they took us seriously at first, but the more details we gave, the more their questions shifted. Were we sure we didn't just drink too much? Maybe we wandered off and passed out somewhere. They weren't straight up accusing us, but it was obvious they weren't entirely convinced anything criminal had actually happened. I told them it didn't make sense that we would have drunkenly walked over an hour away by foot. I don't think they liked that comment very much. I gave the officers my sister's number and asked them to call her. She was already tracking my phone using Find My iPhone. To all of our surprise, my phone was showing up in the middle of a parking lot just a few minutes away. The officers agreed to drive us there, and sure enough, both of our phones were just sitting on the pavement next to each other. Getting my phone back felt like a win, but it only reinforced the police's theory that we were just drunk and confused. They started saying we probably hadn't even been robbed, that we lost our wallets the same way we lost our phones. We tried to convince them to check out the house Marcella had brought us to, the one she claimed was hers, but they weren't interested. They kept saying we were probably too drunk and didn't remember things right. One of the cops even said, "Happens more than you think." Then they gave us their cards and told us to call if we remembered anything else. It was actually shocking how unwilling they were to connect us with anyone who might take us seriously. They told us to find our own ride home now that our phones were charged, and they just left us there. Once they were gone, I went through my phone for the first time, and things only got weirder. There were texts sent from my number to a bunch of people I knew: Jimmy, my parents, a few co-workers, even some girls I had been texting. The texts all sounded like me: calm, casual, normal. Stuff I could have said on a regular night out. But when you read them together, they didn't make any sense. One message to Jimmy thanked him for a fun night and said, "We crashed at a buddy's place." One to my dad said we were safe and had found a coach to sleep on. Another to a girl I'd been talking to said I was just home relaxing and thinking about her. None of the texts lined up with each other. They all contradicted one another. Then I noticed I had a bunch of missed calls and texts from Jimmy, so I called him back. He sounded super relieved to hear from me and said he honestly thought Ryan and I had died or something. He told us to stay put. He'd come get us. While we waited, Ryan and I canceled all of our credit cards. Interestingly, none of them had been used, despite the fact that whoever had them had probably had them for several hours. On the ride home, Ryan and I couldn't stop talking about what could have happened. None of it made sense. Yes, we'd been drugged. That much was obvious. But that didn't explain everything. I've never heard of a drug that makes you black out but still act and text like you're totally normal. Everything I've read about roofies and similar drugs says they mostly just make you pass out, not stay awake and function. But based on the messages, I was definitely conscious, and what was the point? Why go through all that trouble just to rob two random guys? Especially if you're not even going to try to use their credit cards. We approached them, not the other way around. So it's not like we were being stalked or targeted, and that's not even getting into how or why we ended up in a random town an hour away wearing other people's clothes. As insane as it sounds, both Ryan and I actually checked ourselves for surgical scars, wondering if maybe they'd tried to harvest our organs. Thankfully, there was nothing. Jimmy suggested maybe they gave us some weird experimental drug, which, yeah, kind of makes sense. But still, someone had to have driven us to that town, and someone had to have changed our clothes. And that probably wasn't just the girls. We never got answers. But we didn't forget. Ryan and I actually drove all the way back to the shore a few days later, determined to find that house. We figured if we walked the boardwalk long enough, we'd eventually recognize it, since it was right on the beach. And believe it or not, we actually did find it. We walked up to the door and rang the bell. An older man answered and asked what we wanted. I did the talking, didn't want to say too much or accidentally admit to anything. I just asked if a girl named Marcella lived there, or if he had a daughter or granddaughter around our age. He gave me a flat-out no. So I made up a quick story about how some girl had lied about owning the house, and oddly enough, he actually thought it was funny. That was the end of it. We walked away, but I can't lie. As we walked off, I had this sick feeling in my stomach. Not fear exactly, just deep discomfort. Like something really wrong had happened to us and we'd never be able to explain it. For a long time after that, I was convinced those girls were part of something way bigger than anything Ryan or I could even imagine. Like maybe the plan was to kidnap or kill us, but something changed at the last second. I know I'll never get any real answers, but if something else ever happens, I'll definitely send an update.